My name is Connie, and I just turned 72. I always looked forward to birthday celebrations with my family, especially my daughter Amanda. But this year, something felt different about her smile, and the way her husband kept glancing at my property papers. I never imagined my own child could betray me so deeply. If you're watching this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and let me know where you're from. My survival story might just save someone else's life. I live alone in the sprawling farmhouse that has been in my family for 3 generations. The Riverbrook Farm, as we've always called it, sits on 80 acres of prime land just outside Millfield, with rolling hills that turn golden in the summer and a creek that winds through the property like a silver ribbon. My late husband Jack and I spent 50 wonderful years here, and since his passing 5 years ago, I've managed to maintain it myself despite my age. Real estate developers have offered up to $4 million for this land, but I've always refused. This isn't just property to me, it's my heritage, my home, and the physical embodiment of my family's history. My daughter Amanda never understood my attachment to the farm. Growing up, she was always restless here, dreaming of city lights and fast-paced living. By 18, she'd packed her bags and headed to Chicago, returning only for obligatory holiday visits. Now, at 48, she's built what looks like a successful life on paper, a luxury condo downtown, designer clothes, and social connections with the city's elite. But beneath the glossy exterior, I've always sensed a hollowness in her achievements, as if she's still that little girl trying to prove herself. Amanda's husband Derek came into her life 15 years ago. Tall, charming, and always dressed in expensive suits, Derek presents himself as a successful businessman. He has a way of talking that makes everything sound like an opportunity, his hands always gesturing enthusiastically about his next big venture. But for all his grand plans and promises, success seems to slip through his fingers like water. I've noticed how Amanda's smile tightens when he talks about his latest investment opportunity, the slight tension around her eyes betraying her concern. The only true joy in their household is my granddaughter, Hannah. At 20, she's everything her mother wasn't at that age, thoughtful, grounded, and genuinely kind. She's studying environmental science at the State University with dreams of sustainable agriculture that make my farmer's heart proud. Unlike her mother, Hannah loves visiting the farm, helping me with the garden, and sitting on the porch swing, just listening to my stories of the old days. She reminds me so much of Jack sometimes that it takes my breath away. My relationship with Amanda has always been complicated. Even as a child, she seemed to be searching for something in me that she couldn't find, some approval or validation that I apparently failed to provide. I loved her fiercely, but my practical, hardworking farm wife approach to motherhood didn't seem to give her what she needed. As she grew older, that gap widened until conversations became performative rituals filled with polite inquiries and careful avoidance of anything meaningful. Last winter, I accidentally learned about Amanda and Derek's financial situation when Hannah let it slip during one of our baking sessions. Apparently, Derek's latest business venture, some kind of tech startup involving artificial intelligence, had collapsed spectacularly, taking their substantial investment with it. They had remortgaged their condo to fund it and now faced the possibility of losing their home. Hannah wasn't supposed to know, but she'd overheard her parents arguing late one night, her mother's voice rising with accusations about irresponsibility and broken promises. I considered offering help, even prepared to liquidate some of my savings, but something held me back. Perhaps it was the memory of the last time I'd offered financial assistance, when Amanda had reacted with such indignation you'd think I'd insulted her rather than offered support. Pride, it seems, is the Johnson family's besetting sin. So I kept my knowledge to myself, watching from a distance as the strain showed more clearly in Amanda's carefully maintained appearance and Derek's increasingly desperate business proposals. Jack's absence still feels like a physical ache some days. We'd met at the county fair when I was just 17. him in his pressed shirt, and me in my blue ribbon dress, after my strawberry preserves won first place. He'd asked if he could write to me, and for 2 years, those letters were my lifeline through the lonely days at my parents' farm. When we married, my father gave us this farm as a wedding present, and Jack poured his heart and soul into every acre. Even when farming became more challenging economically, he refused to sell. "Land is the only thing they're not making any more of, Connie," he'd say with that crooked smile. "We're not just keeping it for us, we're keeping it for those who come after us." In his final days as cancer slowly claimed him, Jack made me promise to preserve the farm for future generations. "Promise me you won't sell no matter what," he whispered, his once strong hand now frail in mine. "This land has stories in every furrow. It deserves to stay in the family." I promised, of course. How could I not? Those were the last coherent words he spoke to me before slipping away 3 days later. For 5 years, I've honored that promise through harsh winters and scorching summers, through loneliness and grief. I've modernized where necessary, hiring local farm help seasonally, and even converting part of our land to organic methods with Hannah's guidance. The farm isn't just surviving, it's thriving, producing income that ensures its own maintenance with plenty left over. It's become my purpose, this guardianship of legacy, and despite the occasional aches in my joints and the silence of the house at night, I've found contentment in fulfilling Jack's final wish. What I couldn't know was how that promise would soon be tested in ways I never imagined by the very people who should have understood it most. The farm that represented my past would soon become the catalyst for the most terrifying experience of my life, orchestrated by my own flesh and blood. The first unusual sign came on a Tuesday in early March, 3 months before my birthday. My phone rang during my morning coffee, Amanda's name lighting up the screen. Calls from her were rare enough that I felt a flutter of concern as I answered. "Mom," her voice sounded different, softer somehow. "I was just thinking about you. How are you doing out there all alone?" The conversation that followed was strangely pleasant, with Amanda asking detailed questions about the farm, my health, and even reminiscing about her childhood summers spent wading in the creek. When she suggested visiting that weekend, I nearly dropped the phone in surprise. In the past 5 years, her visits had been limited to major holidays, and even those felt performative rather than heartfelt. True to her word, Amanda arrived that Saturday, but what shocked me even more was that Derek came with her. He'd always made excuses to avoid the farm, claiming allergies or pressing business matters. Yet there he was, dressed casually for perhaps the first time since I'd known him, complimenting my flower beds and asking thoughtful questions about the property. "You've done an amazing job maintaining all this, Connie," he said, his arms sweeping across the view from my front porch. "Most women your age would have sold years ago. It's impressive, really." Something about his tone made me uneasy, but I brushed it aside, grateful for this unexpected interest from my daughter and son-in-law. When they left that evening, Amanda hugged me tightly, another rarity, and promised they'd be back soon. True to her word, the visits continued. Sometimes just Amanda, sometimes with Derek, always with thoughtful little gifts and unusual attentiveness. Derek began offering unsolicited advice about the farm's management and asking surprisingly detailed questions about my finances. "You really should consider setting up a trust, Connie," he suggested during their 3rd visit. "At your age, it's important to have everything properly organized. I know a great attorney who specializes in estate planning for agricultural properties. I'd be happy to introduce you." "That's very thoughtful, Derek, but I've worked with Robert Miller in town for decades. He handles all my legal matters," I replied, noticing the brief flash of irritation that crossed his face before his smile returned. Of course. But Robert's getting up there in years himself, isn't he?" Might be time for someone with more updated knowledge of current tax codes and inheritance laws. Just something to consider. By April, the visits had increased to weekly occurrences, and phone calls came almost daily. Derek even offered to help me modernize my financial record keeping, suggesting I give him access to my accounts so he could set up online banking for me. I declined politely, saying I preferred my paper statements and in-person visits to the local bank where I'd been a customer for 50 years. One rainy afternoon in late April, Hannah came by unexpectedly. I was delighted to see her, especially since her studies usually kept her too busy for midweek visits. But as we sat at the kitchen table with mugs of hot chocolate, I noticed her unusual quietness. "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked, reaching across to touch her hand. She bit her lip, a childhood habit that always surfaced when she was troubled. "Grandma, have Mom and Derek been visiting you a lot lately?" When I confirmed they had, her frown deepened. "And have they been asking about the farm? About your will and stuff?" "They've shown more interest in the place, yes. Derek's been quite helpful with suggestions for maintenance and legal matters." Even as I said it, I felt a flicker of unease. Hannah pushed her mug away untouched. "I overheard them talking last week. They didn't know I was home. Mom was saying something about how they needed to secure the future before it's too late, and Derek mentioned convincing you to sign some papers." She looked up at me, her young face pinched with worry. "I don't know exactly what they're planning, but it didn't sound right, Grandma." I reassured her that I was perfectly capable of managing my own affairs, but after she left, her words lingered like a chill in the air. That night I called Robert Miller and asked him to review my will and ensure everything was in order. I also made clear that no changes were to be made without my personal visit to his office and explicit instructions. As my birthday approached in June, Amanda called with unusual excitement in her voice. "Mom, we want to make your 72nd really special. Derek and I are planning a surprise party for you at Le Chateau. We're inviting all your old friends from town." Le Chateau was the most expensive restaurant in Millfield, a place Jack and I had visited only for our 40th anniversary. It seemed an extravagant choice, but Amanda insisted. "You deserve to be spoiled, Mom. Let us do this for you." The restaurant was certainly elegant with its crystal chandeliers and white linen tablecloths. Amanda had reserved a private dining room decorated with arrangements of my favorite flowers, dahlias and sweet peas from my own garden. I realized with surprise. But even more surprising was the guest list. Instead of my old friends from town, the room contained only Amanda, Derek, Hannah, and Robert Miller, my attorney. "I thought you were inviting everyone," I said, trying to hide my disappointment. "We decided a small family gathering would be more meaningful," Amanda explained smoothly. "Quality over quantity, right." Throughout dinner, Derek kept refilling my wine glass despite my protests, while Amanda presented me with a series of expensive gifts: a cashmere sweater, a diamond brooch that must have cost thousands, and finally an envelope. "This is our special gift, Shaw," she said, her eyes bright with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Derek and I have arranged a private day trip for you tomorrow, a boat tour of Crestwood Lake. It's supposed to be absolutely beautiful this time of year." "That's very thoughtful," I said, genuinely touched, despite my lingering unease. "Will you all be joining me?" "Of course," Derek interjected quickly. "A family adventure. Hannah too, right, honey?" Hannah, who had been unusually quiet all evening, looked startled. "Oh, actually, Derek," Amanda interrupted. "Hannah mentioned earlier she has that study group tomorrow for her summer course, but it'll be the three of us, like old times." I could have sworn Hannah looked relieved, though she covered it quickly with a smile. "I'm really sorry, Grandma. I wish I could come." Robert Miller, who had observed the entire exchange with his lawyer's careful attention, caught my eye briefly. Something in his expression made me think he shared my growing discomfort with the evening's strange undercurrents. As we were leaving, Robert pulled me aside briefly. "Connie, call me tomorrow before you go on that trip. There's something about your property taxes I need to discuss with you." I nodded, understanding the pretext for what it was, an opportunity to speak privately. Derek appeared suddenly beside us, his hand clamping firmly on my shoulder. "Everything okay here, not discussing business on Connie's birthday, are we, Robert?" "Just a minor matter," Robert replied evenly, not intimidated by Derek's imposing presence. "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." That night, as I prepared for bed in my quiet farmhouse, I found myself thinking of Jack. "Something doesn't feel right," I whispered to his photograph on my nightstand. "I wish you were here to tell me if I'm just being a suspicious old woman, or if there's really something to worry about." As if in answer, a sudden breeze through the open window knocked the photo frame face down. When I picked it up, I noticed something I'd forgotten was tucked behind the photograph, a small note Jack had written me years ago. "Trust your instincts, Connie. They've never steered you wrong yet." I slept poorly that night, dreams of dark water and Amanda's face smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes, disturbing my rest. By morning, I'd made up my mind to call Robert before making any decisions about the boat trip. But as I reached for the phone, it rang in my hand, startling me so badly I nearly dropped it. It was Hannah, her voice hushed and urgent. "Grandma, I can't talk long. I just wanted to tell you I'm not really busy today. Mom told me not to come on the trip. She said it was adults only, but I heard her tell Dad it would be easier without Hannah there asking questions. I don't know what that means, but please be careful today. Maybe you should say you're not feeling well." Before I could respond properly, she ended the call abruptly. I stood there holding the silent phone, my unease now blooming into real fire. The morning of what would become the most terrifying day of my life dawned bright and clear, the kind of perfect summer day that usually lifts the spirits. But as I watched Amanda's sleek silver SUV pull into my driveway precisely at 10 o'clock, all I felt was dread. I'd tried calling Robert after Hannah's warning, but reached only his voicemail. After leaving a message asking him to contact me urgently, I debated what to do. In the end, some combination of curiosity and disbelief, surely my own daughter couldn't mean me harm, led me to decide to go, but stay vigilant. I tucked my cell phone securely in my pocket and left a note on the kitchen table, stating exactly where I was going and with whom, just in case. "Happy birthday again, Mom," Amanda called too brightly as I approached the car. She wore large sunglasses despite the early hour, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail that emphasized the tension in her face. "Ready for your surprise adventure?" Derek sat behind the wheel, his usual business attire replaced by casual clothing that still somehow looked expensive. "Good morning, Connie," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "Beautiful day for a boat ride, isn't it?" I settled into the back seat, noting how Amanda chose to sit up front with Derek rather than beside me. As we pulled away from the farm, I caught Derek watching me in the rearview mirror, his expression calculating. "So, tell me more about this lake," I said, keeping my tone light. "I don't believe I've ever been to Crestwood." A flicker of something confusion alarm passed between them before Amanda responded. "Oh, it's gorgeous, Mom. Very peaceful and private. Derek found it. It's actually a bit of a hidden gem." "How nice. And we're taking a commercial boat tour," I pressed, watching their reactions. Derek cleared his throat. "Not exactly. I have a friend who loaned us his private boat for the day. Much more exclusive that way." The conversation lapsed into uncomfortable silence after that. I noticed we were heading northwest away from any lakes I was familiar with in the area. The roads became increasingly rural, the houses fewer and farther between. After nearly an hour of driving, Amanda suddenly turned in her seat to face me. "Mom, Derek and I have been thinking a lot about your situation." "My situation," I echoed. living alone on that huge property at your age. It's not safe, and it's got to be overwhelming to maintain. Derek nodded, eyes still on the road. We've been researching some really wonderful assisted living communities, Connie. Beautiful places with gardens and social activities. You'd have your own apartment, but with staff available whenever you need help. I don't need help, I said firmly. The farm is doing well, and I hire seasonal workers for the heavy work. Amanda sighed dramatically. That's just it, Mom. You're spending so much of your savings maintaining a property that's simply too big for one elderly woman. The word elderly stung more than it should have. At 72, I was still active and completely independent. What Amanda means, Derek interjected smoothly, is that it makes financial sense to sell the farm now while property values are high. You could live very comfortably on the proceeds, and we could establish a trust to ensure your care for the rest of your life. And what about Jack's wish that the farm stay in the family? I asked quietly. Amanda made a dismissive noise. Dad's been gone 5 years, Mom. He couldn't have anticipated how difficult it would be for you. He would want you comfortable and secure. I am comfortable and secure, I insisted, and I promised him. Promises to the dead don't have to rule the living. Derek said, his tone hardening slightly. Be practical, Connie. What are you going to do with that farm in another 5 years when you can't manage it all? Hannah certainly isn't going to want it with her environmental career taking her all over the world. This was news to me. Last I'd heard, Hannah was hoping to apply her studies to improving our farm's sustainability. But before I could question this, the car made a sharp turn onto an unpaved road. The densely wooded lane twisted through thick forest branches, occasionally scraping the car's roof. No houses were visible, no signs of civilization at all. This didn't look like the approach to any lake resort I could imagine. Are you sure this is the right way? I asked, unable to keep the tension from my voice. Positive, Derek said curtly. Like I said, it's private. Exclusive. After several more minutes of increasingly rough terrain, the trees opened up to reveal not a lake, but a wide, fast-moving river with steep banks. A small, weathered dock extended into the water, and tied to it was not the pleasure boat I had expected, but a simple aluminum fishing boat with an outboard motor. This isn't Crestwood Lake, I said, stating the obvious. Amanda removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were cold and determined. No, it's Blackwater River, much more suitable for what we have planned. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the breeze coming off the water. And what exactly do you have planned? I asked, my hand moving to my pocket to ensure my phone was still there. Just a discussion about your future mom, Amanda said, but her tone held no warmth. Derek, why don't you get the cooler from the trunk? I'm sure Mom would like some refreshments after the long drive. As Derek moved to the back of the car, I took the opportunity to whisper urgently to Amanda. What's really going on here? This isn't like you. For a moment, something like regret flickered across her face. Life hasn't turned out the way it was supposed to, Mom. Derek's last business failure wasn't just a setback, it was a catastrophe. We're not just in debt. We're facing bankruptcy, possibly even criminal charges, for some of the methods he used to secure investments. I could help you. I offered, desperate to connect with the daughter I'd raised. We could sell part of the farm enough to get you back on your feet. She shook her head. It's too late for half measures. We need all of it, and we need it free and clear. Her eyes hardened again. And we need it soon. Derek returned, carrying not a cooler, but a thick manila envelope. Shall we take a stroll by the water? The view from farther along is quite something. I hesitated, every instinct screaming danger. I think I'd rather stay here. Actually, I'm not feeling well. Perhaps we should head back. Nonsense, Derek said, taking my arm in a grip too firm to be considerate. The fresh air will do you good. Just a short walk, Connie. We have important things to discuss. With Derek's hand clamped on my arm and Amanda walking close behind me, I had little choice but to allow myself to be led along a narrow path that followed the river's edge. The rushing water below looked dark and dangerous, much deeper than it appeared from a distance. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" Derek commented casually, as if we were truly on a pleasure outing. "Secluded, private, the perfect place for family matters." We reached a section where the path widened slightly on a jutting outcrop over one of the deepest parts of the river. Derek finally released my arm and stepped back, creating a small triangle with Amanda and me. "Here's the situation, Connie," he said, his friendly facade dropping completely. "You're going to sign these papers." He pulled several documents from the manila envelope. "They transfer ownership of Riverbrook Farm to Amanda with provisions for your care in the facility we've selected." "And if I refuse?" My voice was steadier than I felt. "That would be unfortunate," he replied. "Very unfortunate indeed." As they continued talking, outlining their demands and making thinly veiled threats, I pretended to consider the papers Derek was now holding out to me. But my attention was actually on the hushed exchange I could hear between them when they thought I was distracted. "Once she signs, we still have the other problem," Amanda whispered. "One step at a time," Derek murmured back. "Get the signature first, then we'll take care of the rest. Accident by the river. Tragic drowning body carried downstream. By the time they find her, if they ever do, the property transfer will be complete." The blood turned to ice in my veins as I realized the full horror of their plan. This wasn't just about pressuring me to sign over the farm. They never intended for me to leave this place alive. My own daughter had brought me here to die. "I'd like to walk a bit closer to the edge," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the terror coursing through me. "The view must be spectacular from there." I needed to buy time to think, to find some way out of this nightmare. Amanda exchanged a quick glance with Derek, a silent communication passing between them. "Of course, Mom," she said with a smile that chilled me to the bone. "The perspective from the edge really changes everything." I moved wonderfully toward the outcropping that jutted over the rushing river below my legs, trembling with fear and age. The water churned dark and menacing some 20 feet below, swollen from recent rains. I noticed with growing horror that this spot seemed chosen with purpose. The bank was steep, the current strong, and there were no witnesses for miles. Derek followed closely, the papers still in his hand. "Beautiful, isn't it? Now, about these documents, Connie, it's really quite simple. You sign here and initial these paragraphs and everything is taken care of. You'll want for nothing at Golden Meadows. It's a top-tier care facility." "A prison, you mean?" I replied, stalling as I desperately tried to think of an escape route. "Don't be dramatic, Mom." Amanda sighed, positioning herself between me and the path back to the car. "It's the responsible choice. You're 72. Falls are the leading cause of injury for people your age. What happens if you break a hip out on that farm alone? You could lie there for days before anyone found you." "The concern in your voice would be more convincing if you hadn't just planned my drowning death," I said, watching their faces carefully. For a moment, genuine shock registered on both their faces before Derek recovered. "I don't know what you think you heard, but you're confused. The stress of the drive, perhaps, or maybe it's early signs of—" "Don't you dare suggest I'm senile," I snapped. "I heard you both perfectly clearly. You want me to sign over the farm, and then you plan to make sure I have an accident in this river." Amanda's face hardened, the last pretense of filial concern evaporating. "You've always been stubborn, Mom. Always thought you knew best. Well, for once you're going to do what's best for this family." "By dying, that's what's best for the family." My voice broke on the last word. "What's best is securing the future of the next generation," Derek interjected smoothly. "Your attachment to that outdated farm is sentimental and impractical. $4 million can change our lives." "And my death? Is that just a practical business decision, too?" I was backing away slowly, inch by inch, but there wasn't much room on the outcropping. Something like regret flickered across Amanda's face. It wasn't supposed to come to this. If you'd just been reasonable about selling the farm years ago. So, this is my fault. Your decision to murder me is because I kept my promise to your father. The absurdity and horror of it all threatened to overwhelm me. Sign the papers, Connie, Derek said, his voice hardening. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. I realized then that there was no reasoning with them, no appeal to familial love or moral decency that would sway them. Greed and desperation had twisted them beyond recognition. My only hope was to somehow get back to the car, or at least to use my phone to call for help. As if reading my mind, Derek stepped closer. Phone, he demanded, holding out his hand. When I hesitated, he roughly grabbed my arm and patted my pocket, extracting my cell phone. With a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it into the churning water below. Now the papers, he said, thrusting them toward me along with a pen. Sign, and we can all leave here with dignity. The lie was so transparent I might have laughed if I weren't so terrified. I knew with absolute certainty that whether I signed or not, they intended for me to end up in that river. My only chance was to somehow get past them back to the path. I pretended to consider the documents, scanning them quickly. I need my reading glasses. I stalled. They're in my purse in the car. Nice try, Amanda scoffed. Derek will read them to you. As Derek began reciting the legal jargon, I noticed Amanda had shifted positions slightly, creating a small gap between herself and the rocky wall of the outcropping. It wasn't much, but it might be my only chance. Wait, I interrupted. Before I consider signing anything, I want to know one thing. Was any of it real? The recent visits, the birthday celebration, the gifts? Or was it all just part of the setup for this? The question seemed to catch Amanda off guard. For a brief moment, her expression softened, showing a glimpse of the daughter I remembered. I did try to find another way, Mom. I suggested selling just part of the farm, but... Derek cut her off with a sharp gesture. Enough talking. Sign the papers, now. In that moment of distraction, I made my move, lunging toward the small gap beside Amanda. For a woman of 72, I moved with surprising speed, fueled by pure survival instinct. I almost made it past her, my fingers grazing the rough stone of the path beyond. But Derek was faster. His hand caught my arm in a vice-like grip, yanking me backward. I lost my balance, stumbling toward the edge of the outcropping. For one terrifying moment, I teetered on the brink, the dark water swirling dizzyingly below me. Then I felt it, a firm push between my shoulder blades. Not an accidental bump, but a deliberate shove with both hands. I heard Amanda gasp, whether in shock or dismay I couldn't tell. And then I was falling, the world tilting crazily around me. The impact with the water knocked the breath from my lungs. The June air might have been warm, but the river was shockingly cold, the current immediately seizing me in its powerful grip. I surfaced briefly, gasping and flailing, catching a glimpse of Amanda and Derek standing at the outcropping above their figures, already diminishing as the river carried me swiftly downstream. Help! I tried to scream, but water filled my mouth, choking me. I heard nothing in response except the roar of the river. The current tumbled me like a rag doll, slamming me against hidden rocks and submerged branches. Each impact drove more air from my lungs. Each desperate gasp brought more water than oxygen. My sodden clothes dragged me down, my shoes became lead weights. The logical part of my brain knew I should kick them off, but panic and cold were making coherent thought increasingly difficult. As the river swept me around a bend out of sight of my would-be murderers, a strange calm began to replace the panic. Was this what drowning felt like? This detached acceptance, images flashed before me. Jack on our wedding day, his eyes crinkling with laughter. Amanda as a small girl picking wildflowers in our meadow. Hannah's face lit up with excitement as she showed me her college acceptance letter. No, I thought fiercely, the mental denial cutting through the encroaching fog. I will not die here. Not like this. Jack's voice seemed to whisper in my ear, as real as if he were swimming beside me. Remember the fallen oak, Connie? The one that bridges the creek behind Miller's property. Look for something to hold on to. Don't give up. With renewed determination, I fought to control my movements in the powerful current. When the river slammed me into a large object, a fallen tree extending partly into the water, I grabbed desperately at the branches, ignoring the way they scraped and tore at my skin. For a moment, I thought I had it, my fingers closing around a thick branch, but the current was too strong, ripping me away and spinning me downstream once more. The brief struggle had cost me precious energy. My limbs were growing numb from the cold, responding sluggishly to my commands. My waterlogged clothes pulled me under again and again, each resurfacing more desperate than the last. A roaring filled my ears. At first, I thought it was just the sound of my pulse thundering with exertion, but it was growing louder. With horror, I realized what it was: rapids ahead. In my rural county, Blackwater River was known for its dangerous sections, places where the water frothed white over jagged rocks. I was being swept directly toward them. The first impact knocked what little air remained from my lungs. Something sharp sliced along my leg, bringing a flash of pain that cut through the numbing cold. I was underwater again, disoriented, unable to tell which way was up. My lungs burned for air, the instinct to breathe, fighting against the knowledge that breathing meant death. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, the river seemed to release me, the current gentling as the channel widened. With my last reserves of strength, I kicked toward what I hoped was the surface. My head broke into air and I gulped it greedily, coughing and sputtering. The river had carried me far from the outcropping where Amanda and Derek had pushed me in. Now the banks were lower, less steep, with trees growing almost to the water's edge. Something large floated nearby, a section of tree trunk, its bark still attached, creating handholds. With strength born of desperation, I lunged for it, my fingers digging into the rough bark. This time, I held on, pulling myself half out of the water across the log. The makeshift raft continued downstream, but more slowly now as the river widened and shallowed. I lay draped across it, too exhausted to do more than hold on. My breathing ragged, my body trembling with cold and shock. Time lost meaning. The sun moved across the sky, warming me slightly, but not enough to stop the violent shivering that had taken hold. My thoughts grew increasingly confused, fragments of memory mixing with hallucination. At one point, I could have sworn Jack was sitting on the log beside me, telling me to hold on just a little longer. When the log bumped gently against something solid, it took me several moments to realize we had reached a bank. With the last of my strength, I rolled off into shallow water and crawled onto land, collapsing on the muddy shore. The world spun sickeningly around me, darkness encroaching at the edges of my vision. The last thing I remember before unconsciousness claimed me was a rough voice saying, "Good Lord, there's someone here, Martha, call an ambulance," and the sensation of a warm hand on my cold cheek. I awoke to the steady beeping of hospital monitors and the antiseptic smell that seems universal to all medical facilities. My body felt like one massive bruise with sharper pain radiating from my left leg and ribs. A cannula delivered oxygen to my nose, and various tubes and wires connected me to machines tracking my vital signs. Disoriented, I tried to piece together how I had gotten here. The memories came flooding back in a horrifying rush. The river, the push, the desperate struggle to survive, and the betrayal my own daughter and her husband had tried to murder me. A movement to my right caught my attention. A man in worn overalls sat dozing in a chair beside my bed, his weathered face suggesting a life spent outdoors. As if sensing my gaze, he opened his eyes, revealing a kind but concerned expression. "You're awake," he said, straightening in his chair. That's good, real good. Doctor said you might sleep another day at least. Where am I? My voice emerged as a raspy whisper, my throat raw from swallowing river water. Millfield General. I'm Frank Dawson. Found you half dead on the riverbank behind my property yesterday afternoon. You've been out for about 20 hours. Yesterday afternoon. Had it only been one day since my world had shattered. Thank you, I managed, for saving me. He waved away my thanks. Any decent person would have done the same. My wife Martha's gone to get coffee. She'll be mighty pleased to see you awake. She's been worried sick. I tried to sit up but gasped as pain lanced through my ribs. Frank quickly reached for the bed controls, raising the head slightly to a more comfortable position. Easy now. Doc says you've got 3 cracked ribs, a nasty gash on your leg that needed 20 stitches and more bruises than they could count, plus hypothermia and water in your lungs. It's a miracle you survived that river. A miracle indeed, or perhaps Jack watching over me. Either way, I was alive, which meant Amanda and Derek believed they had succeeded. A strange sense of power came with that realization. Frank, I said, gathering my strength. I need to ask you an unusual favor. Please don't tell anyone I'm here or that I survived. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. What do you mean, your family must be worried sick? The nurse said they couldn't find any ID on you, but surely someone's looking for you. The people who should be looking for me are the ones who pushed me into that river, I said, watching his expression shift from confusion to shock. You're saying someone tried to kill you? This wasn't an accident. I hesitated, the words sticking in my throat. How does one admit that their own child wanted them dead? But I needed this man's help, which meant I needed his trust. My name is Connie Johnson. Yesterday was my 72nd birthday. My daughter Amanda and her husband Derek took me to Blackwater River, supposedly as a birthday surprise. Their real plan was to force me to sign over my property to them and then make sure I had a fatal accident in the river. Frank's face darkened with each word. That's monstrous. We should call the sheriff right now. No, I said quickly. Not yet. Right now they think they've succeeded. I need to speak with my attorney first, figure out how to proceed. He still looked doubtful, but something in my expression must have convinced him. All right, Mrs. Johnson, but I can't lie to the hospital staff. They need your real information for treatment. I understand, but please ask them to keep it confidential, to list me as a Jane Doe on any visible records, and I need to use a phone. Frank nodded, then hesitated. There's something else you should know. There's been news reports about a missing elderly woman. They've been showing your picture on the local channels since this morning. Your daughter and son-in-law have been making tearful appeals for information. The audacity of it sent a surge of anger through me briefly, overwhelming the physical pain. They're covering their tracks, I said grimly, establishing their alibi as the grieving family. Martha Dawson returned, then a kind-faced woman with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun. Upon seeing me awake, she hurried over her expression, reflecting genuine relief. Oh, thank goodness Frank's been worried sick, and so have I. How are you feeling, dear? Before I could respond, Frank interjected. Martha, Mrs. Johnson here needs to make a private call. Could you go ask the nurse if that's allowed in her condition? Martha looked puzzled but nodded. Of course. I'll be right back. Once she had left, Frank leaned closer. Who do you want to call first? Robert Miller, I said without hesitation. He's my attorney, but also an old friend. I trust him completely. Frank produced a slightly battered cell phone from his pocket and handed it to me. Use mine. Less likely to be monitored than the hospital phone. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed the familiar number. After 3 rings, Robert's gruff voice answered. Miller speaking. Robert, it's Connie Johnson. My voice broke slightly on the words. There was a stunned silence before he responded. Connie, My God, they're saying you're missing, possibly drowned. Where are you? Are you all right? I'm at Millfield General, but no one knows that yet except the kind couple who found me and brought me in. I need to keep it that way for now. I could almost hear the attorney's mind shifting into professional gear. You think your disappearance wasn't an accident? I know it wasn't, I confirmed. Amanda and Derek took me to Blackwater River and pushed me in after trying to force me to sign property transfer documents. Robert's sharp intake of breath was the only indication of his shock. I'll be there in 15 minutes. Don't talk to anyone else until I arrive. True to his word, Robert appeared in my hospital room exactly 15 minutes later. At 68, he still cut an impressive figure, tall and straight-backed, with a full head of silver hair and piercing blue eyes that didn't miss much. I'd known him since he was a junior lawyer fresh out of law school, when he'd helped Jack and me set up our first property agreements. Frank tactfully excused himself, promising to keep my secret, and leaving me alone with Robert, who took in my battered condition with growing anger. "Tell me everything," he said, pulling a small recorder from his pocket. "I want a complete record of what happened." For the next hour, I recounted every detail, the strange change in Amanda and Derek's behavior. Over the previous months, Hannah's warnings, the birthday dinner, and finally the terrifying events at the river. Robert listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each revelation. When I finished, he switched off the recorder and sat in silence for a moment, organizing his thoughts. "This is attempted first-degree murder, Connie. Premeditated with financial motivation, clearly established. They're looking at life sentences if we can prove it." "Can we?" I asked. He sighed. "It's your word against theirs at this point. We need more evidence. Right now they're playing the part of the grieving family perfectly. There was a press conference this morning. Amanda was barely able to speak through her tears as she begged for information about her missing mother. The thought of Amanda pretending to grieve while knowing she had pushed me into that river made me physically ill. I turned away, fighting a wave of nausea. "What do we do now?" I asked when I had composed myself. Robert's expression turned calculating. "First, we keep your survival secret a little longer. They believe they've gotten away with it, which means they might get careless, say something incriminating, make moves regarding your property." "Hannah," I said suddenly. "My granddaughter. She needs to know I'm alive. She tried to warn me, Robert." He nodded thoughtfully. "If you trust her completely, we could bring her in. She might even be able to help us gather evidence against her parents." "I do trust her," I said without hesitation. "She's nothing like them." "I'll contact her discreetly," Robert promised. "In the meantime, you need to focus on recovering your strength. This isn't over, Connie. Not by a long shot." As Robert prepared to leave, I caught his hand. "Thank you for believing me without question." He squeezed my fingers gently. "I've known you for 40 years, Connie. You're incapable of making up something like this. Besides, I've had my suspicions about Derek for years. The man's always struck me as someone who measures everything, and everyone in dollar signs." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Jack would be proud of how you're handling this. You always were the strongest person he knew." After Robert left, I lay back against the pillows, exhaustion overtaking me once more. The hospital staff, now sworn to secrecy about my presence, brought me medication for the pain and helped me eat a little soup. That night, as I drifted in and out of a fitful sleep, I found myself wondering how we had come to this point. Where had I gone wrong with Amanda? What hunger for material things, what emptiness had driven her to the point where she could look into her mother's eyes and then push her to what should have been a certain death? There were no answers in the sterile hospital room, only the quiet beeping of machines and the occasional footsteps of nurses in the hallway. But one thing was certain: the woman who had entered that river was not the same one who had survived it. Something had changed fundamentally within me. The trust and forgiveness that had defined my relationship with my daughter had been washed away by those dark waters, replaced by a steely resolve I hadn't known I possessed. Amanda and Derek had tried to take everything from me, my life, my home, my dignity. They had failed. And now they would learn what happened when they underestimated Connie Johnson. For the next week, I remained officially missing while recovering at the Dawsons' farmhouse. Frank and Martha had generously offered their guest room. Once I was released from the hospital, understanding the need to maintain the illusion of my disappearance. Their 100-acre property was remote enough that no one would accidentally spot me yet, close enough to town for Robert to visit regularly. My body was healing slowly, the bruises fading from angry purple to sickly yellow-green, the gash on my leg itching as the stitches did their work. But the deeper wounds, the ones no doctor could treat, still ached with every breath. How does a mother reconcile herself to her child's betrayal? There were moments when the grief of it threatened to overwhelm me, usually in the quiet hours before dawn, when sleep eluded me. 4 days after my disappearance, Robert brought Hannah to the farmhouse. I was sitting in a rocking chair on the enclosed back porch when they arrived. The moment she saw me, Hannah broke into a run, crossing the distance between us with a strangled cry. "Grandma!" She fell to her knees beside my chair, her arms encircling me gently as though afraid I might shatter. "I thought you were dead. They said you fell into the river during your birthday trip. They've been searching for days." I stroked her hair, the familiar softness of it bringing tears to my eyes. "I didn't fall, sweetheart. I was pushed." She pulled back slightly, her young face twisted with a mixture of horror and realization. "Mom and Dad, they really did it. I was afraid they might try something, but I never thought they'd actually—" "I know," I said softly. "It's almost impossible to believe." Hannah wiped angrily at her tears. "I should have done more than just call you that morning. I should have come over or called the police or something. You did warn me, and that made me cautious. It may have saved my life," I reassured her. "And now you can help us make sure they face consequences for what they've done." Robert cleared his throat. "That's actually why I brought Hannah here today. She's discovered something that might help build our case." Hannah nodded, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "After you disappeared, Mom and Dad acted weird, like really weird. Dad kept saying things like, 'It's finally over, and now we can move forward.' Mom would shush him, especially when I was around." She unfolded the paper, revealing what looked like account statements. "They think I'm still at college, but I came home secretly to look for any evidence. I found these hidden in Dad's home office, safe." She bit her lip. "I know the combination because I once saw him open it. He doesn't know that I know." Robert took the papers, examining them carefully. "These are statements for an offshore account in the Cayman Islands opened just 3 months ago. There are also quotes from real estate developers for the farm property dated before Connie's accident." "They were planning this for months," Hannah said, her voice shaking, "setting up accounts where they could hide the money from selling the farm." I studied my granddaughter's face, noting the shadows under her eyes and the determined set of her jaw. So young to be facing such ugliness from her own parents. "There's more," she continued. "I installed a recording app on my phone and left it hidden in their bedroom last night. I thought maybe they might say something when they thought they were alone." She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly. "You should hear this." She pressed play, and Derek's voice filled the room, slightly muffled but recognizable. "Still don't understand why they haven't found a body yet. The current was strong that day." Amanda's voice responded, tense and irritated. "The police said sometimes bodies get caught on underwater obstacles or wash up miles downstream. It doesn't matter. She's gone, and that's what counts. Did you call the real estate agent back?" "Tomorrow. He says Westfield Developers is still interested, even increased their offer to $4.2 million given the tragic circumstances. Apparently they've wanted that land for years, but the stubborn old woman wouldn't sell." "Don't call her that," Amanda snapped. And keep your voice down. Hannah could come home unexpectedly. Hannah's too busy with her studies to bother us. Besides, she believes it was an accident, just like everyone else. Stop worrying." A silence followed. Then Amanda again, her voice lower. "Do you ever think about what we actually did?" "Don't start with the guilt now," Derek said harshly. "It's done. We needed this. You know what would have happened if we'd declared bankruptcy, everything gone, maybe even jail time for me. This way, we're set for life. One push solved all our problems." The recording ended there, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. Robert was the first to speak, his voice tight with controlled anger. "This is exactly what we needed. Combined with Connie's testimony and the offshore account records, it's enough for an arrest warrant." "What happens next?" Hannah asked, looking between Robert and me. "We take this to the district attorney," Robert explained. "Once they've reviewed the evidence, they'll issue warrants. Given the seriousness of the charges and the evidence we have, Amanda and Derek will likely be arrested immediately." "And then what?" I asked, suddenly uncertain. The prospect of seeing my daughter in handcuffs, facing a trial in prison, brought a fresh wave of pain, despite what she had done to me. "Then there will be a preliminary hearing, followed by a trial if they don't accept a plea deal. Given the strength of our evidence, they might plead guilty to lesser charges to avoid the maximum sentence." Hannah reached for my hand. "Are you sure you want to go through with this? Grandma? It means everyone will know what Mom did. There will be publicity, a trial." I squeezed her fingers gently. "Yes. What they did wasn't just a betrayal of me, it was a crime. They made their choice, and now they have to face the consequences." Robert nodded approvingly. "I'll take these materials to DA Patricia Langley first thing tomorrow. She's tough, but fair. Once she sees this evidence, things will move quickly." And they did. Within 48 hours of Robert's meeting with the district attorney, arrest warrants were issued for both Amanda and Derek on charges of attempted murder, conspiracy, and fraud. At Robert's suggestion, I remained missing until the actual arrests to prevent any chance of them fleeing. On the morning of the arrests, Robert arranged for me to watch from his car, parked across the street from Amanda and Derek's condo building. I wasn't sure why I needed to witness this moment, but something in me required this closure, needed to see justice beginning its course. The police arrived with 4 squad cars' lights flashing. 8 officers approached the building, half going to the back entrance, while the others proceeded to the front door. From my vantage point, I couldn't hear what was said when they knocked, but I could see when the door opened and Derek appeared, his expression shifting from annoyed to shocked as the officers informed him of the charges. Amanda appeared behind him, wearing what looked like expensive loungewear, her hair perfectly styled even at this early hour, her face drained of color as the officers entered their home. Minutes later, they both emerged in handcuffs. Derek stone-faced Amanda, looking around wildly as if searching for escape or intervention. As they were led to separate police cars, Amanda suddenly looked in our direction. Though the car windows were tinted for one heart-stopping moment, I was certain she saw me, recognized me sitting there watching her downfall. But then the moment passed as she was guided into the back seat of the cruiser, the door closing firmly behind her. "Are you all right?" Robert asked quietly. I realized I was crying silent tears tracking down my cheeks. "No," I answered honestly, "but I will be." Later that afternoon, I returned from the dead, officially. Robert had arranged a meeting at the police station where I gave a formal statement about the events at the river. The detective handling the case was professional, but couldn't quite hide his amazement at the story. A 72-year-old woman surviving an attempted murder by her own daughter, then hiding her survival to gather evidence against the perpetrators. News of my miraculous survival and the arrests spread quickly through our small community. By evening, it was the lead story on local news stations, complete with helicopter footage of police leading Amanda and Derek into the county courthouse for their arraignment. I declined all requests for interviews, instead issuing a simple statement through Robert asking for privacy during this difficult time. The media speculation was wild enough without adding fuel to the fire. Some outlets painted me as a calculating revenge seeker, others as a tragic victim of familial greed. The truth, as always, was more complicated than any headline could capture. The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks later. In the meantime, both Amanda and Derek were held without bail, deemed flight risks due to the offshore accounts and the severity of the charges. Hannah moved temporarily into my farmhouse, both of us finding comfort in each other's presence as we navigated this new reality. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow, Hannah asked the question I'd been dreading. "Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Mom?" I considered my answer carefully, wanting to be honest without burdening my granddaughter with my darker thoughts. "Forgiveness isn't something I can force," I finally said. "Right now it feels impossible. What your mother did wasn't just a mistake or a moment of weakness. It was a calculated decision made over months. She looked me in the eye and pushed me into that river, knowing I would likely drown." Hannah nodded, her young face solemn in the fading light. "But," I continued, "forgiveness isn't primarily for the person who wronged you. It's for yourself, to free you from carrying that weight of anger and betrayal forever. So while I can't forgive her today or tomorrow, or maybe even next year, I hope someday I'll find a way to release that burden for my own peace." "You're the strongest person I know, Grandma," Hannah said, leaning her head against my shoulder. I smiled, thinking of how Jack had said almost the same thing to me countless times. "Strength comes in many forms, sweetheart. Sometimes it's surviving a river. Sometimes it's just getting up each morning and facing the day, despite everything." As darkness fell, completely bringing with it a canopy of stars above our farm, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since that terrible day at the river. Amanda and Derek had tried to take everything from me, my life, my home, my future. Instead, they had lost everything themselves, while I had gained something unexpected, a new appreciation for the preciousness of life and the surprising depths of my own resilience. Whatever the future held, the trial, the public scrutiny, the long process of healing, I would face it with the same determination that had kept me afloat in those dark waters, not just surviving, but living fully and purposefully, honoring Jack's memory and creating a legacy worth inheriting for Hannah and the generations to come. The weeks leading up to the trial were a strange mixture of healing and heartbreak. As news of my survival and the arrests spread, our small community responded with an outpouring of support that both comforted and overwhelmed me. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years appeared at my door with casseroles and offers of help around the farm. Old friends called or visited, some crying with relief at finding me alive, others awkwardly trying to find words for a situation so beyond normal experience. Frank and Martha Dawson. My rescuers became dear friends. They refused any reward, insisting that anyone would have done the same, though I knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have taken in a battered stranger, protected her secret, and opened their home and hearts so completely. I arranged for a portion of the farm's best acreage to be legally designated as a wildlife conservation area in their name, a gesture that left Frank speechless and Martha dabbing at her eyes with her apron. Physical recovery came more quickly than emotional healing. By the time the preliminary hearing arrived, my bruises had faded, and the gash on my leg had healed to a thin pink line that would eventually become just another scar with a story. But inside, the wound of betrayal remained raw and painful, especially as more details emerged through pre-trial discovery. Robert had managed to obtain Amanda and Derek's text messages from the months leading up to my birthday. Reading them was like watching a horror movie unfold in slow motion, The calculated planning, the discussion of how to gain my trust, the cold consideration of various accident scenarios. Derek had even researched drowning statistics and river currents, determining that Blackwater River's strong current and remote location made it the ideal spot for their plan. Most disturbing were the messages they exchanged immediately after pushing me into the river. While I had been fighting for my life in those churning waters, they had been driving calmly back to town, discussing what clothes to wear for the discovery of my disappearance and which real estate agent to contact first. The preliminary hearing was mercifully brief. With the mountain of evidence Robert had assembled my testimony, Hannah's recording the offshore account documents, the text messages, and the real estate inquiries made before my accident, the judge quickly determined there was more than enough probable cause to proceed to trial. Amanda and Derek had separate legal representation, a strategy that became clear as their defense approaches diverged. Derek's attorney began floating the idea that he had been manipulated by his wife, suggesting Amanda had masterminded the entire plot. Amanda's lawyer countered by painting her as a victim of financial abuse and coercion by her domineering husband. Their attempts to shift blame to each other might have been almost comical if the stakes weren't so high, and if I weren't watching my own daughter throw away what remained of her dignity and integrity in a desperate bid to save herself. Hannah struggled perhaps most of all. At 20, she was facing the devastating reality that both her parents were capable of attempted murder for financial gain. She attended therapy sessions twice weekly, trying to process the unimaginable betrayal, while also supporting me through the legal process. "How do you do it, Grandma?" she asked one evening as we sat in the farmhouse kitchen going over her witness statement with Robert. "How do you face them in court without falling apart?" I considered the question carefully. When I'm in that courtroom, I'm not just Connie Johnson, Amanda's mother. I'm a witness to a crime, a survivor speaking truth to power. I focus on that role on ensuring justice is served, not just for me, but for what's right. The truth was more complicated, of course. Each time I saw Amanda in her orange jumpsuit, seated beside her attorney with her once perfect hair now limp and her face devoid of makeup, something in me ached with a mother's instinctive love. But then I would remember the cold calculation in her eyes as she watched me teeter on the edge of that outcropping, and the push I felt between my shoulder blades, a deliberate act, not a moment of passion or temporary insanity. 2 weeks before the trial was set to begin, Robert received a call from the district attorney's office. Both defense attorneys had approached the DA with interest in plea deals. After years of prosecuting cases, Patricia Langley had developed a reputation for tough but fair negotiations, and she wanted my input before proceeding. "They're looking at life sentences if convicted at trial," Robert explained during our meeting in the DA's wood-paneled office. "The evidence is overwhelming, and neither has a clean record to fall back on. Derek has those financial irregularities from his failed businesses, and we've discovered Amanda has a sealed juvenile record for theft and fraud." "What are they offering?" I asked, steeling myself for whatever came next. Patricia Langley, a formidable woman in her 50s, with prematurely silver hair and penetrating dark eyes, leaned forward. "Derek is willing to plead guilty to attempted murder in the first degree if we drop the conspiracy and fraud charges. That would still carry 25 to 30 years. And Amanda, she's offering to testify against Derek in exchange for a reduced charge of attempted manslaughter, claiming she was under his influence and didn't know he intended to kill you until the moment it happened." The absurdity of this claim might have made me laugh if it weren't so offensive. "That's ridiculous. She was an active participant. She helped plan everything. She was standing right there when he pushed me." Patricia nodded. "I agree. Which is why I've countered with the same offer we gave Derek, plead to attempted murder. One, we drop the lesser charges. 25 to 30 years. No possibility of parole for at least 20. I took a deep breath, trying to imagine my daughter spending the next quarter century in prison. She would be in her 70s when released, about the age I was now. The thought brought no satisfaction, only a profound sadness. "What do you think they'll do?" I asked Robert. "Derek will probably take the deal. His attorney knows they have no defense against the evidence. Amanda—" He shook his head. "She still believes she can convince a jury she was coerced. It's a gamble that could cost her a life sentence if she loses." In the end, Derek accepted the plea deal, receiving a 28-year sentence. Amanda, true to her stubborn nature, rejected the offer and insisted on going to trial, a decision her attorney clearly advised against based on his barely concealed frustration during the final pretrial hearing. The trial itself lasted 9 days, though it felt like 9 years. I testified for nearly 2 full days, recounting every excruciating detail of the betrayal and my fight for survival. Amanda watched me from the defense table, her expression alternating between calculated displays of remorse when the jury was watching and cold hatred when they weren't. Hannah's testimony proved particularly powerful. The jury visibly reacted to this young woman, describing how she had discovered her own parents' plot and gathered evidence against them, knowing it would likely send them to prison for decades. When asked why she had done it, her answer was simple but devastating. "Because right and wrong matter more than blood. Because my grandmother deserved justice. Because if they could do this to their own mother, what else might they be capable of?" On the 8th day, the prosecution and defense made their closing arguments. The prosecutor methodically laid out the mountain of evidence, while Amanda's attorney made a last desperate attempt to portray her as an unwilling participant, manipulated by her husband. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with their verdict, guilty on all counts. Amanda showed no reaction as the verdict was read, her face a mask of practiced composure. It wasn't until the judge ordered her taken into custody, pending sentencing, that the facade cracked. As the bailiffs approached to lead her away, she suddenly turned toward me in the gallery. "Are you happy now?" she hissed loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your own daughter in prison for the rest of her life, was your precious farm worth that?" Before I could respond, the bailiffs had her by the arms, leading her toward the door. Just before they exited, she looked back once more, her face contorted with a hatred that chilled me to the bone. "This isn't over," she called out. "I'll appeal. I'll find a way. You haven't won." The courtroom erupted in shocked murmurs as she was finally removed from the room. Hannah reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Don't listen to her, Grandma. It is over. She just can't accept it." 2 weeks later, Amanda was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 35 years. As the judge read out the sentence, I felt no triumph, no sense of victory, only a profound grief for everything lost. Not just what had been taken from me, but what Amanda had thrown away, her freedom, her future, her soul. After the sentencing, I met briefly with her attorney, who seemed genuinely apologetic. "She wouldn't listen to reason," he explained. "I advised her repeatedly to take the deal, but she insisted she could convince the jury." He hesitated, then added, "She's already talking about appeals, but frankly, with this evidence, it's a waste of time and money." "Thank you for doing your job," I said simply. In our justice system, even the guilty deserve representation, and he had done his best with an impossible case. As we left the courthouse for the final time, a crowd of reporters waited at the bottom of the steps. I had declined all interview requests throughout the trial, but now, with justice served and the process complete, I felt ready to make one brief statement. "Today brings no joy, only closure," I told the assembled microphones and cameras. No mother should ever have to testify against her child. No person should ever have to fight for their life against those they trusted most. But justice has been served, and now the healing can truly begin. I ask for privacy as my granddaughter and I move forward with our lives. With Robert on one side and Hannah on the other, I walked through the crowd to the waiting car, leaving behind the courthouse, and I hoped the darkest chapter of my life. 1 year has passed since the trial, since justice was served in the form of prison sentences that still sometimes keep me awake at night. At 73, I've learned that survival is just the beginning. It's what you do with your second chance that truly matters. The first months after the trial were the hardest. Despite the support of friends and the community, I found myself jumping at unexpected sounds, checking the locks obsessively, and waking from nightmares where I was drowning, while Amanda and Derek watched from the shore. Hannah noticed, of course. My observant granddaughter doesn't miss much. "You need to talk to someone professional, Grandma," she insisted one morning after finding me at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., unable to sleep after a particularly vivid nightmare. "This isn't something you should have to handle alone." She was right, of course. The next day I called Dr. Eleanor James, a trauma therapist recommended by the Victim Services Coordinator from the District Attorney's Office. For 6 months, I met with her weekly, gradually working through the layers of betrayal, fear, and grief that had wrapped around my heart like thorny vines. "What you're experiencing is completely normal," Dr. James assured me during our first session. "You've suffered 2 distinct traumas, the physical trauma of nearly drowning and the emotional trauma of betrayal by those you should have been able to trust implicitly. Either one would be significant on its own. Together, they're extraordinary." Through therapy, I learned techniques to manage the anxiety and flashbacks. More importantly, I began to understand that my inability to recognize Amanda and Derek's true intentions wasn't a failure of judgment or intelligence. It was a testament to my capacity for love and trust, qualities I refused to let their actions destroy in me. Meanwhile, the farm became my healing ground. Working the land that had nearly cost me my life helped reclaim it as a source of joy rather than trauma. Hannah took a semester off from college to stay with me, and together we implemented many of the sustainable farming techniques she'd been studying. We converted additional acreage to organic methods, installed solar panels on the barn roof, and established a small apiary of honeybees that now produce the most delicious wildflower honey I've ever tasted. In spring, when the first seedlings pushed through the soil in the fields we'd planted together, I felt something long dormant stirring within me as well, hope tentatively reaching toward the light. Frank and Martha Dawson remained steadfast friends, visiting regularly for Sunday dinners and bringing their grandchildren to help with the seasonal farm activities. Their oldest grandson, Tyler, took a particular interest in the mechanics of farming, spending hours with me learning about equipment maintenance and irrigation systems. At 16, he reminded me of Jack at that age, earnest, hardworking, and perpetually curious. "You're a natural teacher, Connie," Frank observed one evening as we watched Tyler demonstrate to his younger siblings how to check the beehives safely. "Ever thought about making that more official?" His casual question planted a seed that grew into what became my most meaningful project yet. With Hannah's help, we developed an educational program that brings school groups to Riverbrook Farm to learn about sustainable agriculture ecosystems and the importance of local food production. What began as occasional field trips has expanded into summer camps and weekend workshops that now attract families from across the state. Last month, we hosted our first group of at-risk youth from the city, teenagers who had never seen crops growing or collected eggs from a chicken coop. Watching their initial skepticism transform into wonder and engagement brought me a joy I hadn't thought possible a year ago. "You've created something amazing here, Grandma," Hannah said as we waved goodbye to the last school bus of the season. Now, back in college completing her degree, she returns every weekend and holiday to help with the educational programs. "We've created it," I corrected her. This is your vision, too. The legal aftermath of Amanda and Derek's crimes required significant attention as well. Their condo and possessions were sold to pay restitution and legal fees. With Robert's help, I revised my will establishing a trust that ensures the farm will remain an educational center for generations to come. The bulk of my estate will go to Hannah with provisions for the farm's continued operation as a learning center and smaller bequests to several agricultural education nonprofits. I've received 3 letters from Amanda during her incarceration. The first was full of blame and self-justification. The second demanded financial support for her appeal process. I read them both, but didn't respond. The third arrived just last week with a different tone, less demanding, more reflective. She wrote about participating in a prison therapy program, about beginning to understand the gravity of what she'd done. I'm not sure I believe the apparent remorse, but I've kept the letter uncertain yet whether I'll reply. Derek hasn't attempted contact, which is something of a relief. According to Hannah, who occasionally checks the public records of their cases, he's already been denied his first parole hearing due to disciplinary issues in prison. As for me, I've found a new rhythm to life, one that honors the past without being defined by it. I still miss Jack every day, but now I can visit his grave without the crushing weight of grief that once accompanied the journey. Instead, I find myself telling him about the farm's transformation, about Hannah's accomplishments, about the children who now run laughing through the same fields where we once walked hand in hand. You'd be proud of what we